From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Inside the development of the iPhone with the principal software engineer for the greatest consumer product in history behind the secret walls of the golden age of Steve Jobs at Apple. Tonight on Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Ken Kocienda was the principal software engineer of the iPhone software for Apple, inventor of the keyboard autocorrection at Apple for over 15 years. In addition to iPhone development, worked on the software teams that created the Safari web browser, the iPad, and the Apple Watch. Holds more than 50 patents related to Apple innovation, and is a graduate of Yale, one of our flagship stations. His new book, Creative Selection, Inside Apple's Design Process During the Golden Age of Steve Jobs. Welcome from California, Ken. How are you?
Doing great. Great to be here with you.
Thank you very much. Our honor. Now, I have to say I will always have your name in mind now. Every time I try to type an F-bomb into a text message and it gets changed automatically to duck or ducking, I know you're the guy responsible.
I am the guy responsible, indeed. So now you can't quite put a face to a name. Perhaps maybe that's, but you can put a name to the ducks now.
How about now? I'm about to get an XS Max, right? And you're no longer at Apple, but you're a strong believer that the improvements will be enough in it, I assume, to justify that big price they charge?
I think the improvements to the camera, in particular,
yes,
are really terrific. This whole move toward computational photography, where the software is going to help the hardware and just give you better photos just by pushing the button. So I think it's a very, very exciting advance in what you can expect from cell phone photography. Yeah.
In fact, you just hit my big butt. That's the that's the most important thing to me. I love pictures. I like the screen as big as possible because I can't stand missing the keys, all the time.
Right.
The smaller, which obviously you dealt with a lot in the book, which is kind of very interesting. Well, we got to start off with the most obvious question. What's it like working for Steve Jobs?
Well, it's a pretty pressure-packed environment. It certainly was. And, Steve could be very intimidating, really. I mean, my job was we had an idea for a piece of software, a new feature, some new technology that we wanted to put into the software. Well, that work would land in, say, my lap, someone like me, a programmer. Uh-huh. And it was my job to come up with the ideas to present to him. And then naturally, I was collaborating with other designers and, other managers. But for high-profile features like, say, the keyboard on the original iPhone, Steve was going to want to try it out himself and ultimately approve it. And so this meant showing him work. And, yeah, he could be very, very intimidating. Going into a demo where he was going to look at work, very, very nerve-wracking. But, but the thing is that if he liked the work, he would say so. So there was kind of a wide range of reactions that he might give. He might be sort of upset and tell you so in no uncertain terms. Mm-hmm. But if he liked the work, he could also be very, very praiseworthy. And for me, that in my career, that trade-off was worth it because his approval also would mean that then my work, my effort, would go out into the world in an Apple product, get into the hands of millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. And so it was an opportunity to have that reach. As a geek who likes to sit in the room by myself looking at a computer screen all day, it's a pretty remarkable opportunity to have. So running that gauntlet and having Steve be demanding and expect really top results, at least for me, helped me do my best work and again, helped me to have that reach out into the world and hopefully put some good products in people's hands.
It's interesting to me that you were going through a demo that went well and how important demos were there, and you go through this whole description of it and everything and all the feedback and everything, and then you finish up, Steve said, a total of 4 sentences. in that whole process of which he was very praiseworthy. But 4 sentences.
Yeah. The amount of conversation could be very, very spare. And, part of the idea behind that was that Steve didn't want a whole lot of introduction to the work that he was going to review. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it was setting up a scenario where Steve was like a customer, maybe going into an Apple store and going and walking up to a table where a product is there and pick up the product, and without any preconceived notions, just like a person who doesn't work in the high-tech industry, pick up that product and see if you can figure out how it works. Decide for yourself, just by that experience of interacting with the product, decide for yourself if you want to spend the money, bring that product into your life, use it every day, use it to make your calls, send your texts, take your photos, and use apps, play games, all the features of the product. So going back to that demo experience, he wanted to mimic that what the customer would see and feel and experience by going into a store, maybe without any idea about that product, and try to decide for him or herself whether to buy it. And so, someone like me, I could, do my best to smooth talk him and explain every little detail and nuance of a product in a demo. But again, that's not what he wanted.
It's he has this image of, in some places, of being kind of a terrible guy and not socially aware or whatever. But I get a sense from reading your stuff that it's really a function of the fact that he is so incredibly focused, which is what drove Apple.
He was an incredibly focused person, perhaps the most focused person that I've ever met, ever been in the same room with. And that focus, in some ways, Steve, being the CEO of the company, being the one who was making the calls on a lot of these products, that focus, it was kind of like, the pebble hitting the pond. It would ripple out for sure. It was really most concentrated right around him. But that focus and that drive, that determination to make the products great, which is really how I would describe what his focus was, making great products. And so, yes, he, as is documented elsewhere, I think it's just part of the lore about him now, he paid less attention to social graces.
Yeah.
People can be a complex package, and that was certainly part of his package. But that focus did really permeate the Apple culture, and I think it did have a real positive effect on how the products turned out.
I always I enjoy studying successful coaches and how they build a culture. So I found it interesting that you really compared him to Lombardi, which is people would not would normally draw that line.
Is interesting to me because you look at someone like Steve Jobs and Vince Lombardi, and if you try to evaluate the performance of the organizations that they led, well, I think it's hard to find people who were able to achieve more in a relatively short period of time. Steve took Apple when he returned to the company in the late 90s, and turned it around from a company that had a pretty limited runway. And some people say 90 days of cash left. 15 odd years later, Apple is, was on track to becoming to what it is today. Now, 5 years after he's gone, the first $1 trillion company. It's actually probably more than 5 years now, more like 6 or 7 since he's gone. But the point is that these leaders somehow were able to instill in their organization a winning way. And that was the kind of comparison that I was trying to draw. Lombardi being very, very focused on football and just a few fundamentals that were really important to him. And I think that Steve was the same way about Apple. A few fundamentals, keep the focus on making great products, and it totally turned Apple around.
It's interesting, yeah, because they both maniacal focus on excellence and reducing to simplicity. So it's an interesting stuff. Do you think, we've got only about 30 seconds in this segment, that the secret formula was that they were consumer focused as opposed to pure techie focused?
Yeah, well, the idea about Apple was bringing together the best of technology, hardware, and software with the best of design and culture. We called it the intersection, bringing together these two paths that seem to be going in different directions, but really cross them and position our effort right at that crossroads, bringing the best of products and technology, but bringing that to people and what's meaningful and useful to them in their lives.
You listen to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Biz Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station closest to you, listen over the Internet, access our podcast. We'll get into the secret sauce of the development process at Apple in the next segment. We're back with the former principal engineer of iPhone software. That's Ken Kocienda. And we're going to talk now about some of these, the formula, if you will, that made Apple so successful in development. And you talk about 7 things that sort of go in there. And I'm kind of interested in some of them tying what the term is to, say, an example there. And starting off with inspiration. By the way, inspiration is fascinated that basically you say that inspiration is but really only 1% of the pie and 99% is perspiration.
Right. Well, that comes from Thomas Edison. That's one of his famous quotes referring to his work to invent, of course, the electric light bulb, the photograph, motion picture, cameras, technology, all of Thomas Edison's inventions. He said that it came down to 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, as you say. And a lot of that work, a lot of that perspiration is trial and error. It comes down to trying to take that idea, that little spark of inspiration, and make it real. And this is very, very difficult. In some ways, there's a bit of I think, a misconception about how high tech, the great high tech Silicon Valley stories happen, where some genius wakes up one morning and says, "Aha, I have an idea," and something, and then, $1 billion company. And it just doesn't happen that way. It certainly was not my experience at Apple. So that inspiration needed to be backed up by a lot of hard work.
Very interesting. In fact, you say you only had 2 eureka moments in your entire time there. You had 50 patents and invented auto correct, if you will. Collaboration now. How does that? What is the sauce at Apple? Because from the outside, you hear all this secrecy stuff, so that you don't get a sense, that you can't really share what you're doing with anybody but besides your group and things like that. Collaboration refers to small teams only, or
there is a lot of what, say, like even the military calls like small unit cohesion. Right? You get a group of people together, they get an assignment. Steve, his leadership style was very, very clear in saying what you were responsible for. And so these small teams, got together, and they were really quite small. The hallway where the iPhone software engineers were working for the first version, it was between 20 and 25 people. So it's a really very, very small team. Really.
So it's really unbelievable. It's unbelievable when you think about it.
And so, when it came time to file the big patent, the iPhone patent that describes, it's a big 350-page monster of a patent that describes all of the software for the original iPhone. There are 25 inventors on it, and Steve Jobs is one of them.
Wow.
So there were 24 of us then. That actually includes software engineers and then designers who came up with these patentable ideas that went into making that touchscreen operating system and user interface system work as it did. And getting back to what you say about collaboration, that small group really, really pitched in. If you ever had an idea, I would come into work usually earlier than a lot of other folks. I'm just kind of a morning person, and most people in software and in Silicon Valley are skew more to the evening. I would very often come into work and get a couple of hours of something done, and then have a piece of work, an idea, some little bit of progress to show people as they started rolling in. And that opportunity to show the work and get that feedback and have people be honest and forthright, again, a kind of a ripple from the Steve Jobs culture, is that people would tell you, no, that's no good, or yeah, I really like that. And then we try to dig in more specifically. What is good and worth keeping, and what is bad and really should kind of wind up on the cutting room floor. And that process of collaboration, daily, multiple times a day, was a big part of what kept the progress moving.
This accountability thing too, directly responsible individuals, where really everything is tied very tightly to an individual. You would have been tied tightly to the autocorrect feature.
Right. I was, we like you say, that term, we called it DRI in conversation. So the DRI, directly responsible individual, and I was that for the keyboard. And what was really, it sounds so simple, but was really wonderful about that in the daily interactions was that if anybody had a problem with the keyboard, they know who to go talk to. And they could. They didn't need to go through the management hierarchy or fill out a form. I mean, we certainly had a software system for logging and cataloging and tracking our bugs, our software defects. But, really the first step back in that era when things were so small, if somebody had a problem, they would get up from their desk and walk down just a couple doors and find me. And then, again, an aspect of the collaboration, then those two people, the person reporting the problem, me being responsible for the problem and fixing it, we could decide what to do. We were empowered to make the software better. Let
me ask you this while we're on the small teams, because this kind of blew me away as well. When you guys developed Safari, and Mozilla had 1 million lines of code in it, and you had a really, really small group. Now, first of all, I worked at IBM when I first got out of business school, and IBM might have 10,000 people working on the development of their OS system, right? And so it's really software by committee. And Apple didn't really believe that. So you get more efficiency, more benefit. Is that right? And B, do you risk having stars, essentially? You have 25 guys on the development of the iPhone. You risk any one of those folks leaving.
That is a danger, of course. I tell you, back then, I think that most of the people who are on that hallway now would look back and say, well, that was the highlight of our career. So we weren't really in danger, too many of us, of walking out, certainly not on that first product. But, there's getting to the size of teams in software, one of the more famous books even ever written about software development is called The Mythical Man Month. The author is Frederick Brooks, and he was a program manager back at IBM in the 1960s working on System 360.
Yeah, the big one,
Important milestone operating system development project for IBM in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And he wrote about that experience and OS 360 was late, and what they tried to do was, add more people. If we add more people to this project, we'll get it done faster. Yeah. And what he discovered was actually the opposite was true. Adding people to a late software project only makes it later. And this is counterintuitive until he did his analysis and went through and discovered that, when you bring people onto a new project, they need to be brought up to speed. Well, who's going to bring them up to speed? The people who are already on the project. Well, it just means that those people aren't doing work. They're trained. They're taking time out of doing direct progress and doing indirect progress, which is training, which is not the direction you really want to go when you're already late. And plus, adding people adds more communication paths.
Now, let's finish this segment with Mozilla had 1 million lines of code. What did you get when you guys got Safari finally out the door? How many lines of code were in it?
Yeah, that was probably a fraction of that, probably something around 200,000. So we found a different software project that enabled us to start with fewer lines of code and made it easy for a small team to make that project work.
Listen to Business Talk with Jim Campbell from our flagship stations, WGCH Greenwich, WYBC Yale Radio. We'll have more inside product development at Apple in our third segment.
Money, 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 money. You gotta have it. When you need it, what do? If you don't have a rich uncle, Call LendingTree. With us, hundreds of banks compete for your business, so you'll get loans with competitive interest rates, and in some cases, with no closing costs. So here's the deal. If you need money, call us. Do you want to refinance your current loan? Are you 62 or older and interested in a reverse mortgage? Then call LendingTree now. 888-794-1645. 888-794-1645. We've closed over $250 billion in loans. We know what we're doing and can help you. Call right now for a free quote. 888-794-1645. 888-794-1645. 888-794-1645. That's 888-794-1645. NMLS number 1136.
Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime. The nation's biggest murderers were the go-to source for the Moxley murder and the Skakel appeals. Financial crimes on Wall Street. Inside the crimes of Russia's Putin and more. The facts, the forensics, the inside stories. From the host of Business Talk with Jim Campbell, it's Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime.
Learn more about Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell by visiting Park City Productions 06604's Facebook page. That's Park City Productions 06604.
And we're back with Ken Kocienda. He's the author of Creative Selection Inside Apple's Design Process During the Golden Age of Steve Jobs. And by the way, what do you mean by creative selection?
Well, this refers to my analysis, my formulation of how we did the work at Apple, that it was this long, incremental process of iterative improvement.
Yeah.
Really a Darwinian process so the creative selection, harkens back to the natural selection and artificial selection that Darwin wrote about. And we've already discussed a little bit this idea of getting some collaboration, trying to figure out what's good, what's not so good about a piece of software while it's under development. Well, you try to figure out from that point, try to figure out what the next step is. Try to consolidate that good point and improve it from there. And we did that, just version after version, iteration after iteration. And then we've also even touched on the end of that, which is, ultimately then bucking that up to the team level, the executive level, and ultimately the CEO level, to where Steve was looking at the work, reviewing it, and approving it. And so it was this idea that, you can't just go from inspiration directly to a product. It's a lot of work, and how do you structure that work? To me, it's this long process of iterative improvement.
I also thought it was interesting that the Apple philosophy was not to separate R&D from software implementation.
I was responsible throughout my career, but I just need to confine it to the keyboard itself for that first iPhone. I was responsible for doing the research, for figuring out how might we type on a sheet of glass.
Yeah.
Kind of taking away, changing away from what the smartphone standard was in those times, in the pre-iPhone era, which is the BlackBerry. Right? Everybody had the little plastic chiclet keys, in hardware on the device with the smaller screen above, and everybody loved it. Right? It's the nickname for the product, and some people was the Crackberry. Because people were so in love, so addicted to that little typing experience.
In your own mind, could you see a vision of typing on glass?
Well, in the beginning, not really, to be perfectly honest. But that was a key concept for the whole product, because if the keyboard could be in software, it meant that, unlike the BlackBerry, the keyboard on the iPhone could get out of the way when you weren't typing. So it opened up the device so that the whole screen was available for apps of all sorts. You could see a long list of email messages if you're just reading. You could play a game. You could turn the device to landscape and watch video. And so, getting that keyboard in software so that it could get out of the way of the rest of the apps was a key concept for the whole product. So figuring out how to make that happen, that was the challenge that eventually landed in my lap, and it was again a matter of trying to get some inspiration and going from there.
How did you figure out how to get autocorrect, to work. It's very interesting to me how you looked at even from math probabilities, frequency usage, down to the actual getting how you get the words in there.
That there was a need to be some software assistance that was looking at your typing and trying to figure out what you meant to type. And this gets to a key concept, is that autocorrection, if I were to describe it in just non-technical terms, is that software intent, the intent of the software was to give you what you meant rather than what you did. So if you missed a key, it turns out that the shape of a word, letter by letter, makes a picture like a constellation in the sky.
Yeah.
And so the keyboard could figure out, you missed that key, but really that tap, if I just nudge it a little bit toward the letter that you probably meant, you meant that word, I'll just give that to you, suggest that.
That's cool.
As a replacement of what you actually did.
And in fact, you also describe it as sort of building like a tumbler where you run the letters or the numbers, and because of the fact that where they're located near, and therefore they're more likely to be X, Y, and Z, et cetera.
Right. So this gets to and so a way of describing this is that the first iPhone autocorrection algorithm didn't do spelling correction. Right? It didn't look at how you may have spelled a word wrong. It looks like how you may have tapped a word wrong. And so this idea I had of describing is, you think like a bike lock that has maybe 4 numbers on it, and you can spin the tumblers around to get the right number. We'll replace those numbers with letters, and naturally the tumblers would need to be a sort of larger circumference. But the letters next to each other are the ones that are close to each other on the keyboard itself. So it's not arranged. The tumblers aren't arranged A through Z. They're arranged by the proximity of the letters to one another. So my job, the job of the autocorrection, was to turn the tumblers really as few clicks as possible to get the word that was the most popular in the dictionary, most popular in the language.
Pretty amazing. So did you come up with that logic yourself, or?
Yeah, that was my job. Again, we had very, very small teams. So it was, while I was doing that, people were figuring out how to get a web browser shrunk down so it could run on a phone, and figuring out the whole app design and designing the animations, and figuring out how to keep the phone connected to cell networks, but switch over to Wi-Fi. I mean, there's all kinds of work. So I was the one really charged with the keyboard. There wasn't a keyboard team. But there was only one person on it.
So did you feel intense pressure or fear of failure? One of the things that you mentioned in the book, which I'd forgotten, was the Newton device. That personal device failed. Right.
Well, see, this did create a lot of pressure on me, because Apple did make a product where the intended text entry system was really kind of a new, innovative idea. The Newton with a stylus, and you would try to write with your handwriting, and the purpose of the device would be that it would recognize your handwriting and turn that into computerized text.
Now so you've got the algorithms to try to, logically come up with the right words or the most highly likely. The other side of that, what about all the words? How do they get in there?
Right. Well, it turns out that I had a stroke of good fortune here, which is that Apple wasn't a startup. In some ways, we like to run the iPhone team as if it was a startup, a small team of just a few dozen people working on this software, but Apple had this immense back catalog of projects, because it had been in existence for decades before we started on the iPhone project. So I dipped into the Apple archives of previous projects and found English word lists. There were a couple here and there, and I compiled the list. But then I became the dictionary editor myself, because we discovered that there needed to be some updates, some, LOL wasn't in right? Any of those older word lists. So it needed an update, but I had a very, very firm foundation to build on from previous Apple work.
And you had to be careful, or you actually made sure that it didn't say, suggest dirty words or things like that, right?
Well, you see, it's an interesting problem that we ran into as the autocorrection algorithms were getting better and people were starting to use this and type more realistic things. We ran across this problem of typing swear words, but even sort of worse than that is words that are hateful, hate
right,
speech.
Like racism and stuff.
Right, and so we decided that as a product that we would never want to suggest, we would never want to help people to slur or demean, anybody. Sort of, their racial, gender, national, ethnic issues. None of that would be part of the product. We didn't want to be helpful for that. So those words, I had to actually go do research to find all those words to build up a complete dictionary.
Wow.
So that even if the autocorrection algorithm recognized them, it would never suggest them.
Fascinating. Now, as we last on this segment, what was the single biggest aha moment you had in the development of the keyboard for the iPhone?
Yeah, this came when the autocorrection code got good enough, and that we decided to turn it on full time. That it wouldn't only give you suggestions of what word you thought, but that it would actually automatically change your typing. If you typed RHE space, it would just change it to the, and that was that. And the discovery of that it would actually work well enough that you could just type and trust the software, and that most of the time it would give you what you wanted, was this eureka aha moment that the software could be automatic, that it could be auto correction. And that was really the one of those two breakthrough moments in my whole Apple career.
Final segment coming right up. And we're back with Ken Kocienda, ex-iPhone, Safari, iPad, Apple Watch software engineer, all of some of the biggest products ever in any consumer market, much less all from Apple. And Apple made its name doing these big disruptive deals, the music industry with the iPod, and then, of course, the phone cellular industry. Steve Jobs is no longer with us. Is Apple going to be able to do another big disruptive deal in your mind?
Well, I think that Apple is the best positioned company still to create that next big thing. And I mean, you even look at a product that we haven't really discussed yet, and that I didn't discuss in the book, but the Apple Watch. The potential that the watch has to improve our health is really extraordinary.
I love it too. I have mine.
Yeah, I do too. I went and got a Series 4. For years and years, I would have all the new hardware issued to me, and so it's a big change for me to have to go out to the store and buy these.
Now, I haven't been able to get a 4 yet here at our Apple store, so.
Oh, yeah. I actually went one and got lucky one day. I just went and bought it in the store. But the potential of the software to track your heartbeat, there's rumblings, in the future that it may be help diabetics to monitor their blood sugar levels. This is a remarkable piece of technology, really just improving people's lives, perhaps even saving lives. So, it doesn't seem, the iPhone was this huge groundbreaking product, and maybe it kind of comes once a generation. But Apple is still, in my estimation, making some pretty great products and some new ones that weren't around when Steve was around.
Some of the ideas that you mentioned in the book, eye tracking, augmented reality, what are some of the things that you see on the horizon? Yeah,
you mentioned augmented reality. I mean, to me, this is a type of software that has the potential, again, to become ingrained into our lives in such a way that it just gives these futuristic improvements. So, an example of that would be you're traveling in a foreign country where you don't speak the language that they speak there. And so there's a bunch of signage around, directing you to maybe the museum that you're looking for. And, You hold your phone up to a local map, and the phone will take a photo of that, upload it to the network, translate it, bring it back to you, or perhaps even do this locally. That you don't even need to be connected to the network, where the software and the hardware and the services and the networking will just transparently translate all the world's languages. Now this is and show you that picture, overlaying it onto the map as you're looking at it in real time. Now this is the potential of the future. It's not something we have yet, but it shows where to me it shows the potential where this technology might take us.
You don't see them doing a car or a car software platform or something like that? Well,
I'm not really in the position to say what Apple would comment so much on future products. I mean, there's certainly in the press there's word that Apple is working on a car. Yet another product that could be disruptive. I think we're just going to have to wait and see what Apple does in the future on that.
So why'd you leave Apple?
It's a good question, and I realized after a certain point that I'd been there a long time, and I'm over 50 years old now, and I asked myself, well, in my career, is this it? And it came to a point where I also decided that I'm more of a 0 to 1 guy than version 0 to version 1.
Yeah.
Nothing to something, rather than a version 11 to version 12 kind of guy.
Yeah.
Which is where the iPhone is now. And so I just made a big decision to try something new. And I didn't really know what that was, but then this book project presented itself. I started talking to some people and got introduced to an editor at a New York publishing company, and so for this last year and a half almost, I've been writing this book and really enjoying it.
So it was fun to write a book?
Well, it was certainly different. Again, I like to think that I've tried to build my career around innovation, things that I haven't done before.
Right.
I never made a software keyboard for a touchscreen smartphone until I made one. And I never wrote a book until I wrote one. And so this is, just kind of, full steam ahead and figure it out as you go. I mean, I tried to apply some of the lessons that I learned at Apple toward this book writing project. And, like at Apple, I just did the best I could. And, now there's a book. Did
it feel like Apple was changing a lot after Steve Jobs passed away?
Apple is undergoing long-term changes. It's a much bigger company than when I started.
Yeah.
Back then, I joined before the iPod came out.
Really?
So the company had the Mac, and 4 months after I joined was when the first big consumer sort of non-computer consumer personal technology device came out from Apple. And so now there are many. There are product lines. It's a much bigger company. And, naturally the company has to change to support all these products and to give these yearly updates and try to add in these new health features, and photography features. Those ideas like that were just not really on the horizon at the Apple that I joined back in 2001.
There's always the law of large numbers. It's worth, the market value is over $1 trillion now. Can Apple keep growing as far as the eye can see, or has maybe the best growth behind us now, just on the numbers? But
yeah, well, it would be hard to imagine how Apple could just become 10 times larger than it is now. I don't know if there are enough people on the planet.
Well, now that would be half the size of the U.S. GDP, So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, pretty remarkable, huh? So, to me, I think that the focus, keeping it the same as it ever was, make great products. And if you keep doing that, if the company keeps doing that, I'm sure the bottom line will keep the market happy.
It's a great book. It takes you right deep inside, and you get a sense of what the culture is there and how software development's done for, obviously, some of the most exciting products ever. It's Ken Kocienda. He's a principal software engineer on the iPhone, inventor of the auto-correction functionality on the keyboard, creative selection inside Apple's design process during the golden age of Steve Jobs. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Our next show, we were talking about Lombardi before. We're going to actually look inside the legacy of Bill Belichick, NFL coach of the Patriots. Thanks to the iPhone developer, Ken Kocienda. Thanks to our national audience for listening. See everybody next Sunday on Business Talk.